You can sit. Hello to all of our folks in the room and to all of our folks joining us virtually online. We'd like to welcome you to the University of Michigan Department of Linguistics Colloquium series for 2025-2026. My name is Jessie Grieser. I'm an associate professor in the department, and I am happily the host and introducer of today's, I want to call you a plenarist, today's colloquium speaker, Dr. Kirby Conrod. First, a couple of house rules and our land acknowledgement. We want to make note that the Department of Linguistics recognizes that the University of Michigan has its origins in a land grant from the Anishinaabe, including the Odawa, Ojibwe, and Potawatomi and Wendat peoples. The university continues to exist on the historical territorial land of the Anishinaabe people. Odawa, Ojibwe, and Potawatomi are collectively called Anishinaabemowin and belong to the Algonquian language family. There are 12 currently recognized Anishinaabe tribes in the state of Michigan and many Anishinaabe people living throughout the state and interacting at the University of Michigan. And we recognize in our land grant that the gift of land was interpreted differently between the two parties and that we owe an indebtedness to the Anishinaabe people. Hopefully I get another slide. Nope. Maybe. Okay. In theory, we are supposed to also have a slide that talks a little bit about the accessibility affordances of this presentation, and I will just give that information. You will find that this presentation will be transcribed live by our CART service. And so if you are joining us on Zoom, you're welcome to enable that by clicking on your closed captioning. We thank our CART provider as well as our technicians for assisting us in that. For those of you who are joining us on Zoom, during the Q&A feature, we will use the raise hands and we will allow you to either speak or to have your question read aloud in the room. For those of us who are in the room, we will ask that you please use the microphone so that those who are on Zoom can hear you, and also so that those who are in the room may have maximum accessibility. So, without further ado, I would like to very much thank my colleagues in the Department of Linguistics for having an excellent taste in syntacticians. Dr. Kirby Conrod is ostensibly a minimalist syntactician. And in order to introduce them, I first need to talk to you about marching bands. So the Stedler Trophy is awarded by the John Philip Sousa Foundation to the top marching band. It was originally awarded annually. It is now awarded biannually. It is considered the Heisman Trophy of marching band awards. If an award is given to the best X of any value of X, but the award can only be given to any given X one time, if you are the first X to receive said award, then you are clearly the best existing X of all X's for that type. The Stedler Award was awarded first to the University of Michigan Marching Band in 1982. The Arnold Zwicky Award, which recognizes contributions made to LGBTQIA linguistics, either by an LGBTQIA plus linguist or to advancing the field of LGBTQIA plus linguists, was awarded for the first time, awarded only to one person at a time, and any given person can only be awarded at once, in 2021 to Dr. Kirby Conrod. Dr. Kirby Conrod graduated with their BA from UC Santa Cruz and with their PhD from the University of Washington. Their dissertation, Pronouns Rising and Emerging, made great advances in the syntactic description of gender-neutral pronouns and in non-binary language. They have gone on to be a lecturer at the University of Washington, followed up by a visiting assistant professorship at Swarthmore University that began in 2021. Thankfully, because Swarthmore are not stupid, that line converted to an assistant professorship in 2023. As I mentioned, they are ostensibly a minimalist syntactician and work at the intersection of syntax and sociolinguistics. For example, writing works such as, quote, Abolishing Gender on D. I will note here, of course, that syntax and sociolinguistics have not historically done a good job of intersecting. And so this work is unto itself groundbreaking and important. They have published in a variety of fantastic venues, including the Canadian Journal of Linguistics and the Journal of Language and Sexuality. They share my love of giving our labs and organizations fantastic acronyms, like my lab, the Greaser Observing Black Language Use and Experience, the Go Blue Lab, and their lab, the Socially Contextualized Syntax Lab, the SOX Lab, and their multi-institution consortium, the Scientific Explorations of Pronouns and Trans Acceptance, SEPTA, for those of you familiar with Philly. They also have made very significant contributions to the teaching of syntax through the SynTeach consortium, which is in conjunction with Bronwyn Bjorkman, Cadel Light, and Laura Bailey, in which they have explored a lot of ways in which people have been harmed by the teaching of syntax, and that has stopped a great many of people who should be excellent, wonderful syntacticians from pursuing both that line of inquiry and also linguistics more broadly. They also are a frequent public writer and have wonderful blog contributions on non-binary language, on trans issues more generally, and also on disability in higher education. I super encourage you to take a look at Kirby's blog if you have not done so. If you are a graduate student, if you guide graduate students, if you walk around as a person, you will find wonderful things to read there. So today we are receiving a talk from them on how to non-binary your language, a preview of a forthcoming book, which I understand is almost done and has a great deal many words, as I said, enough words when we went to dinner last night, that is forthcoming from Oxford University Press. So we get to be one of the first audiences to experience this new text. So without further ado, Dr. Kirby Conrod.
Okay, is this working? Cool. Thank you, Josie. That's such an introduction. Gosh. So I'm going to be a little verklempt for the first part of this, but yeah, this is my first sort of full version of the book talk that everybody's hopefully going to be a little sick of by the time the book actually comes out, because frankly, you guys are not the target audience. So this is an explanation of what will be what we call a crossover book, which is for non-linguists, but there's a lot of good meat on the bones that I want to tell you about because I'm excited about it. Also because I am going to be asking you to participate in book with me. This is going to end with a call to action, and the call to action is give me data. But I'm going to start with some called shots. We could call these hypotheses, but these are some called shots. Languages have a few strategies for doing non-binary stuff. Like, when I say non-binary stuff, I mean talking about non-binary people, talking about gender in a way that is outside of the binary, talking about oneself when one is non-binary. There are only so many options, sort of logically speaking. And so I am going to lay out what I think have been the logical options as a sort of typology or a taxonomy of strategies. And I'm going to say that basically there's no reason that you can't combine these strategies, and that is true at the individual speaker level and at the speech community level, that any language community or user can use any combination of these strategies to accomplish doing non-binary gender stuff with language. And that there's going to be an interplay at every stage of this between gender neutral and specifically non-binary language. I'm going to borrow Artemis Lopez's terminology here, talking about indirect and direct non-binary language. Direct non-binary language is I'm talking about a person that me and my interlocutor both understand as non-binary, or I'm asserting that somebody is non-binary. When we're talking about indirect non-binary language, this is more implied. And so this is, I'm leaving out information about gender, and the person may or may not be non-binary. All of the strategies that I've seen so far can be used for both, but I'm interested in what people are doing for direct non-binary language, and the answer is often using indirect non-binary language to talk in a direct way. So we're going to see a lot of that interplay. And for the purposes of this talk, you know, I'm a syntactician, and so I'm allergic to sounds. I'm not going to be talking about stuff like using one's vocal apparatus to create a gendered performance. That sounds like somebody else's job and not mine. And so I'm going to be primarily talking about functional items in the grammar. This is going to include pronouns. This is going to include inflectional morphology. Because they are functional, there's something going on with the morphosyntax apparatus in the brain when people are trying to deal with this stuff that's going to be a little bit different than stuff that applies to lexical items like common nouns or proper names or derivational morphemes, just generally stuff that is a little bit more flexible and easy to learn. So I'm going to be focusing mostly on the functional things because it's the stuff that linguistically I find the most interesting. So here's an overview of the strategies that I think exist. One of them is recycle something that you already have laying around. This is going to be using something that has already been part of the language, maybe as part of an indirect non-binary language strategy, but you're using it now for direct non-binary language. This I think of as sort of like the easiest in my mind, but that's my like English bias coming in because that's what English is doing, so spoiler alert. But it also seems to be weirdly like not cross-linguistically super common. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that when I get into this strategy. Strategy 2 will be blend or compound or combine two things. This is actually in the wrong order. Switch 2 and 3. Well, I'm going to talk about them in a different order, sorry. Strategy 2 is blending or combining things. This is like, I have two gender morphemes. What if I put both of them on there? Or I have two pronouns, one masculine and one feminine. What if I did a morphological compound of those two to make a nice third gender pronoun? And we do see quite a bit of this. Strategy 3, which I'll actually talk about second, is analogical extension. I'm now self-doubting of whether I've got my own order right, I'm sorry. Analogical extension is extending a pattern that already exists. So it's not just using a word that I already had laying around or using a morpheme for new things, but actually applying it to different stuff. So this is going to be something where I had a morphological pattern that was irregular, but I'm making it regular, or I'm extending its reach. I'm applying it to stuff that I wouldn't normally have applied it to previously. And we're going to see a number of examples on this that look a little bit different in different situations. I'm skipping over coining completely new stuff. For a while, this was one of my hypothesized categories, but so far I haven't found anything that is arguably truly a coin that isn't secretly kind of analogical extension. So I will talk a little bit about that, but if you see data that causes you to think about something that is like, no, this is truly novel, this is not a pattern extension of something already existing, I really want to hear about that. And then the fourth and final strategy that I'll talk about is pragmatic strategies, which is an umbrella term for a bunch of different things, but it's mixing and matching stuff. Pragmatic strategies don't actually involve any language change. That was so different. Pragmatic strategies don't actually involve any language change. It's just using the resources that you already had in particular contexts to create meaning in that context. And there's a bunch of pragmatic strategies that I've identified, including switching back and forth between gendered forms, avoiding gendered forms completely, using gender forms that are sort of there to counterbalance other semantic cues, and this kind of thing. The other thing that I want to note, and this is actually, I'm going to give a shout out to my colleague Jonathan Washington, who sort of put this thought in my brain. Stuff like code switching, code mixing, translanguaging, calcs, and loanwords are processes, any language context processes that I've heard about as I've been collecting data and looking at this stuff, are stuff that interact with these 4 existing strategies. So I actually am going to resist the urge to put like language context style strategies into a 5th category, and I'm going to instead look at how they intersect with the 4 categories that I've already sort of laid out here. Okay. Quick definitions. I could have done this first, but I decided not to. Non-binary is an umbrella term. So non-binary is not a particular gender. It's just any gender that's not one of the big 2. And this can include stuff like people will identify as genderqueer or gender fluid, or just like my gender is infinite void. Like that is a non-binary gender because it is a gender that's neither man nor woman. And so I am using that as an umbrella term for a lot of sort of non-normative genders, but I am not assuming that all non-binary people are the same gender. They're not, we're not. Just like straightforwardly, that's just not the case. So that's the first thing to keep in mind. The other thing, I try to avoid the word grammatical gender because I think it's super misleading and confusing. I've been doing a lot of teaching of undergrads. I have this great like first-year seminar going right now, and it's a really confusing term. And so I am into talking about morphosyntactic marking of gender. And when I'm talking about the stuff that gets called grammatical gender, what I'll sometimes do is call that a noun class system. So when I'm talking about a table or a chair having gender marking, like the table or the chair do not have social gender, they don't have semantic gender. What they have is that they are sorted into a class, the noun class system, that happens to share like morphophonological properties that we associate with gendered words. So I'm going to talk a lot about morphosyntactic gender to avoid that grammatical gender confusion. When I'm talking about gender, the social kind, I'm talking about the system of how people organize each other and themselves into groups, approximately based sometimes usually on how they think sex-related characteristics relate to social behaviors and identities. This is a very like loose sketch of definition of gender, and we're all gonna be chill about it, I think. Yeah, everybody's cool here. Yeah, cool. So when we're thinking about how to non-binary a language, also the title of the talk has your, but the book is gonna have a. So like they're distinct now. But when we think about what parts of language need to be non-binary, there's a bunch of stuff where we are marking social and semantic gender on the bits and bobs of language that we are doing. And as a non-binary person, I'm like running into gender all the time. So we are going to look at stuff that marks gender. I'm primarily going to focus on stuff marking gender denotatively rather than connotatively. That I'm mostly leaving aside. But this is going to include stuff like gendered lexical nouns, like girlfriend, husband, uncle, chairman. These are all words that are just common nouns that have some like semantic weight of gender about the referent. If you are a non-binary person who is somebody's girlfriend, what do you want to do about that? And people have various strategies for what they want to do about that. Same thing for titles and honorifics. I love to have the conversation with my friends who are very into the sir and ma'am sort of form of politeness system of like, I don't want you to do that one. I don't know really. And they're like, but it's impolite not to. My personal compromise that we settled on was comrade, which was fun. But also titles like Mr. or Mrs., this kind of thing, carry a lot of gender on them. Terms of address are sometimes looser, but you know, when you walk up to a table of people and say, how are you ladies doing today? You're doing a gender on them. So we got a non-binary that too. Pronouns in English, our third singular pronouns are gendered. And so when I am doing a pronoun about a person in English, that's doing a gender on them. And then English has much less of this, but we're also going to see morphosyntactic agreement like ballerina or actress. Like, what is a non-binary ballerina? maybe just ballerina, I don't know. So this is sort of an open empirical question. And then also, one of the goals is to get away from English. I'm using English as a convenient example for a lot of this, but I'm going to try and look at as many other non-English languages as we have data for. And then you're gonna hear a lot from me like, I don't know about a lot of stuff, because this is really unevenly documented right now. So once we get out of English, the other kinds of things we have to worry about are gender marking on first and second person pronouns, and that can sometimes be in singular and plural. We have to worry about morphosyntactic gender on nouns and all the nominal modifiers that are going to agree with them, of like my articles and my adjectives and these kinds of things. We also sometimes have to worry about morphosyntactic agreement on verbs. So I'm going to be giving examples from languages like Russian, which will get morphosyntactic gender agreement on the verb, or Hebrew, which also does this, or I have just interviewed a wonderful colleague about their Tunisian Arabic use, and also having verb agreement with first person gender. So you're gendering yourself when you say a verb, which is just like, oh my gosh, that sounds exhausting, right? And then we also get systems like gender or gender biased honorific markings. So these are something that like get a little bit away from direct gender, but when you get into languages like Japanese with a lot of honorific systems, those have really strong gender leanings without necessarily directly indexing gender, and so we got to worry about that. I will highlight, I will preview, I have no data about non-binary Japanese people. What are they doing? If you know, email me. You're going to hear that a lot from me today. The other thing that is a big sort of cloud hanging over this entire project is like, is language change good or bad, right? So this is something where like, I've been accused by linguists of being a prescriptivist because I'm telling them not to misgender people. And that's like, I don't like that. So I wanna get on the same page about what we're doing here. I do not consider misgendering somebody to be a linguistic error. I don't think that it's a speech error, it's a speech act. Or I phrase it a little bit differently on the slide here. And wanting not to be misgendered is not about controlling other people's language. I am not interested in controlling people's language. It's about wanting respectful interaction and having a normal reaction when people are disrespectful. So I really want to stress that if I talk about misgendering at all, it's going to be about like relational systems of politeness, which of course vary within and between communities. And so I want us to be mindful of that, but I'm also going to say that misgendering does like empirically validated, like this is true. I don't have the citations on here, I could give you those later, but like misgendering hurts people's feelings and it damages people psychologically when you misgender them a lot. Trans and non-binary people tend to get misgendered a lot, but it's not the case that cis people never get misgendered. Like cis people get misgendered semi-frequently, just less, but it still sucks regardless. And you know, if I correct somebody about misgendering somebody else, the correction is intended to be a correction of etiquette and behavior, not a correction of like grammar or language. So I just want to make sure that we are all super clear on that. Yes, great, thanks. And the other thing is, obviously, I have skin in the game. Like, we live in a society, like, this matters to me. I'm a person with feelings, but I'm also a sociolinguist, right? I appreciate that Jesse describes me as a syntactician. There's like no syntax in this talk, by the way. There's like not gonna be any trees. There's gonna be like some morphemes, but very, very little syntax. I'm a sociolinguist. I am not interested in going around telling people that they're languaging wrong. I'm much more interested in getting a good picture of what people are doing when they're languaging. And if somebody is non-binarying their language, I am not interested in telling them that they're doing that wrong. And I'm also not interested in telling people which one the right way is to do that. And I'm just also going to say that this is a family of language changes with a huge amount of meta-linguistic commentary that I find super interesting. And I want us to be able to talk about the meta-linguistic commentary and the ideology around these language changes without getting into the fight of, okay, but is this one good or not? So let's have that in mind. And this is sort of where I'm going with this. The other thing that I get asked is that people really want me to say which strategy of non-binarying a language is the right answer, which strategy is the correct strategy. And in English, what this looks like is that people will frequently, I noticed this on some of my singular they surveys and some of my neopronoun surveys, where when people see singular they are going to tell me, actually, you know what would be great would be neopronouns, because that would solve a lot of the problems. It would just be like less ambiguous. It would be super clear. Neopronouns would be a better solution to non-binary pronoun in English. And then on the neopronoun surveys, people are like, singular they would be a lot better. These neopronouns are confusing. There's too many of them. They look weird. They're freaking me out. And like, what are you doing? Like, too many pronouns. I don't want to learn all these. Can't we just use they for everybody? So people, like my participants, really want to tell me what they think is the right answer. And people come to me and ask which one is the right strategy. First of all, top-down language engineering doesn't work and also is not my job. Like the amount of force you have to enact on people to force them to use a pronoun is I don't want to do that. And I want to just stress that when people do ask me about this, I want to say it's normal and it's expected for there to be multiple strategies in any given language community. Most people that I've talked to use more than one strategy, including myself. Almost everybody that I've ever interacted with who is non-binary or has a lot of non-binary friends is using more than one of these strategies. It's not the case that one of these is the correct answer. And one of them being much, much more common than the others is not an indication of the very, very minoritized form being less interesting to me as a linguist. So this is something that's come up with sort of my literature reviewing about neopronouns in English, is that the sort of consensus is that neopronouns are used by vanishingly few people, and therefore singular they has sort of won the evolutionary fight. It's come out as the dominant mainstream form, and therefore neopronouns are not interesting. And I'm like, wait a minute, that second part of it, I don't agree with that. They're still interesting. It's not no one. Just something being super low frequency doesn't make it linguistically fake or uninteresting to me. And it's also okay, you're gonna see this stamp one more time, but imagine this stamp on basically every slide, free paper idea to a good home. But it's super interesting to me how common it is that you are going to run into this ideology over and over, that people really want there to be one optimal solution to non-binary language, and they want it to be efficient and clear, and you can't have both of those things. So it's super interesting that people really have this really strong belief. I'm interested in how that interacts with other language ideologies like linguistic purism and this kind of thing. So if you need a language ideology paper topic, there it is. Take it, please. The other thing to be saying about this is that there's a very big spectrum of how documented non-binary language phenomena are in different language groups. I'm sort of using the half-joking acronym White American Vernacular English, WAVE. This is, standard American English is the most documented in terms of what's going on with our non-binary stuff. And no other varieties of English, not even RP or anything. We get a little bit of RP, but it's much less documented. So that's received pronunciation, the standard-ish British English, also not very documented. Nobody has looked at variation within UK English. Nobody has looked at singular they in world Englishes. Nobody has looked at singular they in stigmatized or marginalized varieties of English in the United States. It is constantly making me nuts. If anybody wants to come to me with here's a term paper on singular they, non-binary they in AAE, I will give you a thumbs up and tell you to submit it as a squib to Glossa or something. But please, this needs to be documented. The other things that have been somewhat documented are we have some stuff on Spanish. We have shockingly a lot on Swedish because they got that one cool one. A little bit less we see, but some on German, a little bit of Italian, Russian, tiny bit. I have one big dissertation that you're going to be hearing a lot about. And then just barely starting to document things like Czech and Arabic, various varieties of Arabic. There's a couple articles on Hebrew. There's a couple things on Yiddish that are not published yet. And I'm shaking Josh upside down to try and make the papers come out. So far as I know, there's nothing published on any sign languages or basically anything else, that any other language or language variety that I have not mentioned here. And then sort of an open question on what's going on with how documented this stuff is on Mandarin, because I cannot read some of it. But honestly, I really want to see just straight up descriptive work published of what are people up to, not even generalizations of what is everybody up to, but what is anybody up to would be super great. I want to be talked into editing a special issue of your favorite pet journal. So if you're interested in talking me into that, I will put up a little bit of a fight and then I will be like, oh, go on. So, but like, I think that this would be really fun, so. And then another question that I want to just sort of preface is like, are there strategies other than the 4 that I'm about to talk about? Maybe if we can find some true coinages that really aren't analogical extension. And then I haven't really thought of anything else. If you see something that really doesn't fit into this system, I want you legitimately, genuinely, I want you to email me. Like cold email, no greeting, just like, Kirby, I found this thing. Yeah, okay. The other thing is I want to motivate this. Oh, I put so much front matter on this, sorry. If you are a linguist who does not work on gender, why does this matter at all? And the answer is, this is really interesting as a cross-linguistic family of language changes. I cannot think of another time that we've seen so many unrelated languages participate in changes around the same sort of functional goal and use some of the same strategies. And these are languages that some of them are in contact and some of them are not in contact with each other. And it's just like, when has that happened? What would that even look like? It's so fascinating. And I'm just really intrigued by how it speaks to the connectedness of the world today, of like, everybody is waking up and being like, wait a minute, what are we doing here, gender-wise? It's also a really interesting test case because so many languages are going through this at the same time of like, what kinds of language change are possible on a structural level. So I am again mostly looking at semantic and morphosyntactic and lexical changes. I'm not going to talk about phonological phonetic changes at all, but like what is possible when we're talking about this kind of language change? I think this is a really interesting test scenario. It's also an interesting test case of bottom-up language change at different levels of awareness. I will tell you that a lot of this stuff is super, super salient. Speakers are very aware of their orientation towards these language changes, but at the same time, pronouns are a functional category. If I stop somebody at the end of their sentence and I say, what pronoun did you just use about me? Frequently, they do not know because it's a functional category. Your brain is just erasing it. And so there's something really interesting going on about different levels of awareness, but this is a bottom-up change. Nobody is like imposing this top-down, and there's just like something interesting going on just across all of these changes. There's also so much like really rich metalinguistic commentary. People have a lot, because they're so salient and so politicized. People have a lot to say about it. And it's also led by a very, very small minority of people. So it's not even all trans people. I think the new estimate of how many Americans are trans is like up to 1%. Oh my gosh, right? But not all trans people are non-binary, and not all trans people are participating in non-binary language change. And so this is a change led by an extremely small minority of a minority, right? And so it's super interesting to watch how that's working. So here's the first strategy. It's recycling. We love recycling, right? It saves the planet. English singular they is great for recycling. I have advantages and disadvantages on this slide, in part because people keep telling me about them, but also this is the only slide where I'm going to show you advantages and disadvantages of a strategy, because I feel weird doing that about languages that are not my L1, right? So English singular they was already used as a generic or indefinite singular pronoun for like over 1,000 years. I'm not recapitulating the literature about it because I don't know, because everybody else has already done that. I have nothing new to say, but it's like singular they is very, very old. It's just that old singular they was not non-binary. Old singular they was what I would call indirect non-binary language, in that it's gender neutral, but it's not specifically about non-binary people. And it's one of the reasons that non-binary singular they kind of throws people for a loop, is because that is genuinely novel. And I think we've kind of dated it to emerging around the like 90s. Yeah, thank you for nodding. That makes me feel a lot better. But like, you know, we're doing that based on apparent time data in sociolinguistic studies, because we have no, like, there's no way to automatically in a corpus detect which theys are singular and which theys are plural. So there's no way to do the kind of like massive big data lexicography that we would need to actually pinpoint the first non-binary they. It's kind of annoying, but like extending singular or generic they of like the ideal student should bring their backpack every day. Extending that to non-binary specific reference, like Kirby brings their backpack every day, is not that much of a change. It's just a very, very small step. It's a small semantic or grammatical extension of something that was already part of the language. The disadvantages: one, prescriptivists are very mad and have been mad since the 17th century. And then the other thing that people really like seem to struggle with is that there is a potential ambiguity of reference with some types of antecedents, where if you use a they, sometimes people won't know if you're talking about a singular referent in the discourse context, or if we had a plural referent in the discourse context. I actually had, who was I talking to earlier that was trying to talk about one non-binary person and two, yes, Lisa telling me about the siblings. It's super interesting. So if you have in the discourse context a pair of people and a single non-binary person, and they are misgendering them, so you know you get reference ambiguity that does genuinely trip people up. But recycling is efficient. We didn't have to do anything. We didn't have to coin anything. We don't have to change any agreement. We are using the agreement that we already had at home, right? What I think would count as recycling is semantic shift. So something where stuff used to be neuter, but now they're using it as gender neutral animate, or something where something used to be plural and now we're using it as a singular as well. I actually have not found any significant groups of people using neuter as a strategy for non-binary, despite a number of languages that I'm going to talk about today having trinary grammatical gender, morphosyntactic gender, where they have masculine, feminine, neuter. People are not using neuter for non-binary people, and I think that the answer is that it's kind of dehumanizing. But on the other hand, there are people in English who use its pronouns, so it's probably there are some people doing this, I just haven't found them, right? And to be honest, there are weirdly few examples of this. So English singular they is the very famous example, but there's not that many other clear-cut examples of straightforward recycling of this type. One thing that I find arguable, that I think you can argue that this is recycling, is, so this is from Herman's 2024 dissertation/book that I find absolutely wonderful. This is Non-Binary Russian and Czech, is just using plural as singular. And so this is kind of what I'm talking about as a semantic extension of, I'm going to use the plural morphosyntactic marking to avoid what would be gendered if it were singular. So in this case, in 39, this is the oneself is plural, and the war verb gets plural agreement with oneself. And this is, has a singular subject pronoun there, but a plural like oneselves kind of. So this is a way of just sort of sidestepping the issue, because the plural is not differently gendered in Russian. And then another example in Russian, using we instead of I to avoid gendered agreement on the verb, I believe. And Herman has a lot more examples of this, but this is something that I find arguably a kind of recycling, where it's well, I mean, nothing new is being invented here. We already had these plural words. I'm just using them in a situation where you might not have used them previously. The other thing is that I would argue that loanwords and maybe some types of calques could be recycling. So this is something where I've seen some evidence of people saying that German speakers are borrowing they as day, which phonology, I'm assuming. And that seems to me like a kind of recycling. It's just you're pulling it out of your neighbor's bin instead of your own, and that is a normal way to get cool bottles for your plant cuttings. And this is something that, like, you know, it can only happen because of language contact, right? Like, you can't borrow from somebody who's down the street so far that you're gonna have to, like, you're not gonna drive across town to get somebody else's recycling. So the other language contact borrowing that I know of is borrowing hen from Finnish into Swedish. The orthography changes, but I believe that it's pronounced approximately the same, where some people have argued that this is a borrowing and other people have argued that it's not. And then the other thing that is anecdotal, it's not something that I've confirmed sort of personally, empirically, is other languages, other speakers of languages just straight up using the English word, the English lexeme, they, in place of other pronouns that would be gendered otherwise, where they're just like, blah, 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 they, blah, blah, blah. If you see an example, again, email me, because I'm like, that's so interesting. But I think that that's a good example of recycling from your neighbor's bin instead of your own. The other thing is, like, okay, one thing that I think is kind of impossible to know for sure is, okay, is the Russian plural as singular strategy something that is calqued in from English? If it is, it's not just recycling, it's recycling and then doing something to it, right? Because it's not using the English word they, it's using the morphosyntactic concept of plural as singular. But both Herman 24 and Sitnikova 2021 analogize it to English singular they and kind of imply but don't say outright that it may be due to language contact. So I think that this is something, again, free paper idea of, like, if it just got tired. Okay. If we could prove it one way or another, I don't know what to do about this. Am I like? Yeah, oh, there it is. Okay. So if we could prove it one way or the other, that would be so dope. Sorry about that. Okay, strategy 2. This is in the order that I said it would be. That's good. Blending or compounding. What if I just put 2 of them in there? So one place you'll see blends is English blended pronouns. I'm actually not going to talk about them on this slide because I'm going to have a separate slide to talk about why are they all derogatory? Or they're like orthographic conventions that people use to avoid using generic they of like she/he, but nobody's using that for non-binary people unless they are really avoiding they for some reason. But you get blends, so French yell comes from il and el, and then you also get this kind of like stacked dot form where people are putting both, and this is something that I think only happens in writing. I don't know that anybody has caught it in speech, but I have students looking into it. I hope somebody else looks into it of like, if people are trying to pronounce these dot forms of like both the masculine and the feminine French noun, I want to know what that sounds like, right? You also get ella in Spanish, which is el plus ella, which is, again, just very clearly like, well, you put them together. There's something happening to like change the e, and I'll talk about Spanish a little bit more in the next sort of unit. And then you get these Gendersternchen in German, where the star, that orthographic asterisk, is telling you, like, by the way, like everything before the star was a masculine and everything after the star is a feminine, and I want you to interpret that as both of the markings being on there. I will talk about that in a little bit. And then also, I have heard this sort of anecdotally from a colleague, but I have not seen publications about this happening as well, of a blended form in Croatian onije, which is oni plus one. You just put both of that, both the endings on there. So, I mean, blends and compounds are super interesting. I have not seen anything in this type of thing that is straightforwardly a compound of entire words, except for like lexical words. You know, a compound is when the whole thing of both of them is both there. Arguably, I think that the morpheme endings that we're seeing in like German are like, well, the whole thing is there, and the whole other thing is there. There's no like missing overlap, and so I think those are probably compounded morphemes, which is cool because these are really tiny little subatomic particles. It's cool to be compounding them. Blends are when I put two words or morphemes together, but some of the overlapping material is missing. So like bro-romance becomes bromance because I don't want to say the ro twice, so I just say it once. I'm gonna skip the, the bussy libfix thing, other than to say that like it is genderfully interesting. There's something going on there. But you will sometimes see stuff like libfixes doing some kind of gender work. That was really all I wanted to say about it. So this is one thing that I'm kind of curious about what's going on with these in English, why they are so derogatory. So almost all of the blends or compounds in English that I'm aware of are derogatory or they're straight up slurs. I'm not going to say them out loud because they are slurs, but they are usually nouns, so two pronouns like this and then combined to use it as a noun, or a pronoun and an adjective and then you combine it to use it as a noun. These are slurs. There's primarily transmisogynistic slurs. That's slurs against trans women and trans feminine people. I'm not totally sure why these blends are all derogatory, but I can guess that probably the reason is transmisogyny. I don't really have another explanation other than that these blends are older and that they come from people who are talking about trans people in a disrespectful way and do not like trans people, and particularly do not like trans women. I don't have more explanation than this. This would also be a very spicy, cool paper, like free paper idea, that like, you know, I think that this bears exploration because like it's kind of unique in how bad they are. And this is not the case in other languages. So I just want to talk about something fun to just get the taste of that one out of my mouth. So the German gender Sternchen, which is little gender star, that's the Sternchen is the little star, and then the gender is gender, right? That's so nice. It's arguably just like I put two suffixes on a noun. So I'm citing my former student, Mia Limmer's wonderful thesis that I totally want her to write up as a paper, right? Where she's looking at these role nouns like artist, where the agentive suffix is masculine by itself. So if we get Künstler by itself, that's masculine. If we get Künstlerin, that's feminine. If we get Künstlerinnen, that's feminine plural. And the star is something that essentially makes it so that adding the feminine on doesn't override the masculine. So when the star isn't there, the Künstlerinnen without the star is feminine plural. When the star is there, it becomes what is called the gender inclusive form, meaning that it can apply to somebody of any gender. And there are actually also plenty of examples in Mia's thesis about this being used in the singular as well. So to talk about specific non-binary people in addition, or to talk about people in a gender neutral way. So it's being used in various ways. The other interesting thing is that the star is being pronounced in radio announcements as a glottal stop. So it does seem to be like it's there, it's doing something. And it's just like this interesting orthographic convention that is making its way into the language. But I think that this is arguably the most like, I'm putting two gender suffixes both onto it to accomplish like a compound gender as a way of getting away from the binary of like, one way is get rid of all the gender, one way is put all the genders on. It's like wearing two hats.
Does it always have to occur with the plural? Microphone. Oh, yes. Just before we go too far. Does it always have to occur with a plural to get the, no, okay.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, like I said, this is something that does not always occur with the plural. You can see Künstler star in the singular, and I actually have in the book more examples of people like using the singular to identify themselves in like their Twitter bios and stuff, which I find super interesting. A lot of it using the artist, because artists go on Twitter and post their art, and they're non-binary, so very useful population of data havers. But yeah. All right, third strategy, analogical extension. I'm going fast. This one is, I have a pattern, I'm going to extend it. So in Spanish, amiga is feminine, amigo is masculine. Estudiante is not masculine or feminine. It would depend on what like articles or agreement that you had outside of it. But it's like, well, oh, this A ending is already not gendered. Why don't I just use that for other stuff? So instead of amiga, I have amigue. This is, I would call it indirect language because you can use it for a binary cis person whose gender you know. It's just like, I'm being inclusive by not gendering this form. I think most English neopronouns that I know of also are analogical extensions. So she is to z as her is to zer on this particular set of English pronouns. And the case declensions in the English pronoun system are so irregular and weird that I think we have a lot of tolerance of like different versions of that analogical extension, but I am pretty sure that that's what's going on with most neopronouns in English. I would also kind of argue that han, hon, hen, the Swedish hen borrowed from Finnish is also an example of analogical extension of like, I have a template and the difference between these two gendered pronouns is my vowel, and I'm gonna go ahead and change the vowel to a different vowel in between those two, which I find kind of delightful. So pattern extension, this analogical extension can either involve making new stuff like English neopronouns where z and zer are novel neopronouns, or it can just create neomorphemes without changing the roots of lexical items like amigue and chiques and stuff in Spanish. The thing with coining something new, and I have slotted this in under analogical extension, is so far I have not seen something persuasively truly novel that can't be kind of like pattern extension. So one of my favorite neopronouns to learn about is fey, just because I think it's whimsical. It's fey, fair, fairs, fairer self. That is morphologically completely identical to she, her, hers, herself. It's just like, you know, I'm changing the beginning part, but the endings are all the same. So I think that that one is probably analogical extension. Another neopronoun, this is a very old neopronoun. Neopronouns are not well named. They're not neo, right? The very old neopronoun, thon, or some people pronounce it thun. It's a compound of that one. This one was something where it was the least acceptable in my neopronouns acceptability judgment tasks. And I think it's because it is not directly analogous to existing pronoun paradigms in English. I have never found anybody using this as their personal pronoun. Something going on with that. And then the other thing that I've been told might be a novel coining is elle in French, but I'm like not totally sure that that's not also analogical extension from il and elle in French also. So it's just kind of like a regular pattern extension, but I still think it's pattern extension. Again, so far, I have not seen examples of something that is really convincingly, genuinely novel. And if you see some, please tell me. The other thing I'm going to argue is that deletion is a type of pattern extension. So this is new reports I've gotten from the Yiddish non-binary speaking community. So in Yiddish, the feminine is marked with suffixes where the masculine is unmarked. And so the non-binary strategy is to just drop all the suffixes and stop marking stuff for gender. Yiddish is a language with grammatical gender. But if you're doing this, a lot of the L2 speakers who are non-binary are dropping the morphosyntactic gender from all nouns. There are maybe feminist issues with using masculine as generic, but I am not going to litigate that personally, but it is, I think, still pattern extension, or you could argue maybe it's like recycling because you're using masculine as neutral, but it's dropping stuff from stuff that you wouldn't have otherwise done, which is, I think, why it makes more sense to think of this as pattern extension. I also think it's a good example of these categories being kind of wedgy. When do I stop?
Really have time, like 10 to 20 minutes for questions.
Okay.
So like maybe 10 more minutes.
Okay, thank you. Oh, God. Great. Okay, cool. Sorry, just wanted to check. Okay, another pattern extension thing that I wanted to briefly touch on is this thing going on with orthographic X, where there's some really weird semiotic baggage coming in with the X character. So this is coming from words where Latinx is how it's pronounced by English speakers. And I know that some Spanish speakers will pronounce this as Latine. But you also see this X in like woman, where the man is X'd out. And this is something that comes from some feminist language traditions where it's like having the word man in woman is unfeminist because of markedness, maybe. And then you also get this thing where the X is sort of creeping into other places. So this is an X with ta, coming in with the radical from Mandarin ta, which is the third person singular pronoun. It is pronounced the same for men and women, and the feminine orthographic, like the feminine character for ta was not introduced until I think the 1800s, and maybe for kind of colonialist reasons. So it's interesting that some Mandarin speakers or writers have maybe sort of backformed this gender neutral pronoun, even though the pronoun was already gender neutral, but using the Roman character X in combination with the radical, that comes from ta. It's just like super interesting of like, there's something going on with X. I think it might be related to X being a gender marker that is like the non-M or F gender marker that you can get on some passports or IDs and this kind of thing. So this is free paper idea to a good home. What's going on with X semiotically? But people are definitely using X playfully. So this was the first example I found of somebody talking about barista with an X, baristex. I don't know how to pronounce it, but I find it really fun to be like, oh, the non-binary baristex pouring my venti pink drink with Labubu. I don't know what's going on with this tweet. But there's something where it's pattern extension, but also it's playfulness. And I think that one of the things about pattern extension is it's really, really ripe for playfulness. And so I think that there's a lot of like language play going on in pattern extension in particular that I just find super interesting. There's also a lot of really intense metalinguistic discourse. So I've seen themes of like Latinx is bad because it's not pronounceable in Spanish. Or no, it's not because you just pronounce it as Latine. But then all the A endings and non-binary language are bad because it's white Anglophones who are changing Spanish from the outside. And this sort of spirals into all non-binary language is bad because it's influence from English, that like somehow non-binary gender in general is like an American export. These are ideologies that I've been seeing. It smacks of prescriptivism to me and linguistic purism and just sort of general like anti-language contact sentiment, but it's also interesting that it's very, very loaded onto gender in particular. I think it's an interesting sort of reactionary family of thought. And you might argue that some of it is strategic essentialism, but I find that to be like unstable ground as an argument. This slide is also a free paper. But like something going on here where people are also just like very reactive to this particular kind of language change. All right, last strategy. Pragmatic strategies, my umbrella strategy. This includes stuff like switching pronouns in English or any language. Also, Berschling 2014, this is in Queer Excursions, which is one of my favorite books. Berschling interviewed a bunch of Hebrew genderqueer speakers who are like alternating verb forms back and forth. Amazing. Or another info from Daria of like Croatian speakers just switching back and forth. Switching back and forth is a strategy, avoidance is a strategy, and there's also just like other kinds of things that people are doing. Avoidance is one kind of pragmatic strategy. A lot of people mentioned using avoidance as a strategy that they were intentionally doing. So Berchling speakers, a bunch of them mentioned avoiding an entire verb tense because it's like, well, in Hebrew, that tense of verbs shows agreement with the first person pronoun, so I do not use that tense as a way of avoiding misgendering myself, which is wild. Z Salami, one of my colleagues who was telling me about Tunisian Arabic, says that they avoid words with gendered agreement, and sometimes this means avoiding certain adjectives and certain verb tenses. And then Herman's book also found Russian and Czech speakers avoiding verb tenses that showed agreement, especially first-person agreement, because again, if you're showing masculine or feminine agreement, you might be sort of misgendering yourself, and people don't like doing that. Isn't that hard to do? And my answer is probably yes. Probably avoiding an entire tense to avoid misgendering yourself is cognitively taxing. Sucks. Another strategy that people name that's a pragmatic strategy is switching back and forth. This is something that I have only heard of people doing this, not only, but I have largely heard of people doing this in languages with lots and lots of morphosyntactic agreement. So this is, again, something that Berchling found with their Hebrew their Hebrew speakers of switching every other verb between masculine and feminine agreement to sort of like overall, like kind of make a low resolution, non-binary like bricolage, right? And this is also something that Z talked about doing in Tunisian Arabic, where they were switching back and forth between masculine and feminine agreement to avoid misgendering themselves. And this is also something that Herman documented Russian and Czech non-binary speakers doing, of just like switching. It's also something that you see with pronouns in English and other languages, but so far I have only documented it in English. Joshua Claw's paper about multiple pronoun havers of like, why do people have non-binary pronouns is super interesting. And the other thing is people do switch pronouns for various pragmatic reasons. Being non-binary is not the only reason you switch pronouns about somebody. Sometimes it's just that somebody's gender is not relevant. And sometimes the reason is that somebody, the person that you're talking to doesn't know that person as that gender, and so you're avoiding outing them. There's a lot of different pragmatic reasons that people are going to mix up pronouns about a particular referent. And then the third sort of pragmatic strategy that I've identified is like, this is a bad name for it, but sort of crossing. I think maybe I want to rename this as counterbalancing. This is using the, big air quotes, opposite marking from your assigned sex at birth or something. So I think of this, I talk about this as like the linguistic equivalent of, I'm gonna go on T and grow a beard so that if I wear makeup, I don't get misgendered. I wanna wear makeup, so I need a beard. I am going to go hard in one direction on some gender markers so that it buys me some leeway in the opposite direction. And I think that this is sort of a more extreme version of the sort of bricolage. It's just people counterbalancing this. And this is something that Berchling's Hebrew speakers were doing. Not a ton of Herman's data involves this, but a couple. And then Z also reported doing this in Tunisian Arabic. But also there's lots of people that are like doing crossing or there's also lots of reasons that people are doing crossing or counterbalancing that are not necessarily related to being non-binary. Like drag queens using she for each other is not necessarily about being non-binary, even though obviously some drag queens are non-binary, but not all of them. Some of them are straightforwardly cis men, which is wild to me. And then there's like, okay, he, him, lesbians, email me. But like, you know, this is something where people use these gendered linguistic resources to create a collage of themselves and of each other collaboratively. One of the ways that I describe getting gendered is I'm carrying around a big jar, and every time somebody genders me, they're putting an M&M in the jar. My favorite color is purple. Most people only have red and blue M&Ms. So what I would prefer is only getting purple M&Ms, but if that's not an option, what happens is maybe what I want is a 50-50 split of red and blue M&Ms, if that's all that's on offer, and I'll shake the jar at the end of the day and I'll be like, this is a low resolution purple. You know. The other thing I want to argue is that translanguaging and code switching are pragmatic strategies. So this is something that I've heard a lot of, like, I just speak English, or I don't talk about that stuff in Arabic. I don't talk about it if I'm speaking the language of my family of origin. I'm only non-binary in English, basically. And so there's some interesting like cultural baggage here. People say that they didn't come to their understanding of themselves as trans or non-binary until they moved to the States and learned English, or they don't talk to their family of origin and friends back home at all, or they don't talk about their gender, so it's sort of a moot point. Or it's enough of a fight to get people to use my English pronouns. I cannot be having that fight also in my L2, where I'm an immigrant. I'm like, just whatever. These are pragmatic strategies to me of like how people are dealing with being non-binary and being languagers, you know? The other thing about these pragmatic strategies, none of these are language change. And I think that a lot of them are sort of last resort strategies when people don't have the power and the numbers to get a language change going. And a lot of it is happening in languages with lots and lots of morphosyntactic gender marking on lots of different categories. And they tend to happen in situations where the gender in question is like idiosyncratic or at odds with the surrounding system. This is not something that people are doing when they have access to a robust community of trans and non-binary peers. And also, cis people do all of these strategies for other reasons too. So I think that's important to keep in mind. I want one more slide, but I have to pick what slide. I'll do this slide. My call to action. I would like some data, please. So this is, I'm going to be telling everybody this. I want everybody to, if you know somebody who is doing something, I want to see a bunch of squibs about this, short data reports. I don't think that we need fully developed theoretical papers about every single phenomenon, but boy, some description would be nice. Because, I mean, my project is I'm trying to consolidate what's out there, but what's out there is really, in a lot of places, it's on a lot of just like random people's websites, and people's self-report data is just kind of like not what I want as a linguist. I want like attestations and numbers a little bit. It doesn't need to be a lot, but like I heard this 3 times this week versus you could do this. Telling me I could do this is not helpful because I don't know if anybody is doing this. And I also want people to think about the politicization of these issues. So legislation and litigation about pronouns are on the rise, and it's almost all bad news. And I think that as linguists, we really need to step up and say that language is not something that it is okay to try and control. And that if we are going to make rules, let's make rules about how to respectfully interact with each other, but one of those rules needs to be like, don't misgender people. And that's a different thing than saying like, it's illegal to have pronouns in a public school in Florida. And this is a shout out to In Curzan for working with me on litigation for the state of Florida discrimination case that was about, is it illegal to have pronouns, basically. I also want to ask us to be careful about remapping the way that we think of gender, and also be careful about whether we are secretly trying to engineer a right answer to non-binary language. Okay, I'm really out of time. I'm going to stop. Thank you.
Dr. Conrod, thank you so, so much. I think this talk illustrated something that I have always adored about your work, which is that you force all of us to think more expansively about like everything you want other people to think more expansively about. So we have 20 minutes to think more expansively about these things. If you are online and would like to think more expansively, you can raise your hand and we will expand on your thinking. And if you are in the room, we will find a way to get you a mic. And I see John's hand already ready.
Thank you, Kirby. This is really great and fascinating, and there's so many things to continue to think about. The one question that rose to the top of my mind is this: we use language, at least sometimes, to talk about other people.
Yes.
And so there's this dimension when it comes to these strategies that I'd love to hear your thoughts on, about sort of the strategies that people develop to talk about themselves and communities that they themselves sort of identify with versus the strategies that you see in other people talking to them or about them with different levels of knowledge about how that person may or may not identify themselves. I wonder if there's any systematicity or not in those patterns that you've observed, or your kind of thoughts or analysis of it.
Thank you. Yeah, so this is sort of both an empirical question and sort of a overarching theoretical question. And I want to answer the theoretical question while admitting that the empirical question is undercovered. In my dissertation, I used Dubois' stance triangle to triangulate this shit, right? So like I have a speaker, I have an interlocutor, and I have a third person referent. The relationship of how I feel about my interlocutor, how I feel about the third person referent, how I think that my interlocutor feels about the third person referent, these are all relevant, right? So the example that I give is talking to a friend's parents when the friend is in the closet. Her parents are transphobic, and so I'm obligated to misgender her when I'm talking to her parents, because that is what she would prefer me to do. She's a woman, but she wants me to use he, him pronouns when I'm talking to somebody who it's not safe for her to be out to. And I think that, like, remembering that there are three parties and that the relationships between what?
Can we stop screen share?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
I could just unplug it.
Okay.
Is that okay? The relationships between all three parties are relevant. If I'm talking to somebody who I strongly disagree with the person that I'm talking to about the gender or the pronoun that I should be using about the person that we're talking about, we have to negotiate that in some way. And sometimes the way that I negotiate that is just saying the pronoun that I want them to use louder and louder. And I will still get through a whole conversation sometimes. This was something that really shocked me in grad school, where I could have an entire conversation where I and my interlocutor were using different pronouns about a person for like 10 minutes, and they did not notice. So I think when we are evaluating, like, the framework that I want to use is this stance triangle, because I think it's really useful. And in terms of empirical coverage of are people doing different stuff for themselves and for other people, I think that the answer is almost certainly yes. And do I have data to show you what that looks like? No, not yet. And I would love to see more people working on this. Yeah, thank you. There's a hand way back there.
Actually, we're gonna go to Zoom.
Oh, one from Zoom?
Yes, one.
So some anonymous person asked, like, do LLMs, large language models, use or understand non-binary language, like the examples that appeared in this talk?
LLMs don't understand things because they do not have minds. So that would be the first thing I would say. And then the second thing I would say is that I would direct this person to Vagrant Gautam's work on looking at how LLMs produce and process non-binary pronouns, including stuff like singular they in English or neopronouns in English. And there's some good, like, cool queer computational linguists who are working on this that know more than I do. So Vagrant Gautam, Gautam, is the citation that I would give there. If the person can give me a thumbs up in the chat if that's like sufficient answer. Thank you. Yeah, okay, cool, thank you. There was a hand way back here.
Thanks. I could be asking about like something idiosyncratic, but it's something that I noticed in your speech, and I was asked recently by an L2 speaker of English, and I wanted to see your perspective. So thinking about the reflexive themselves versus themself, like, do you see any like difference in distribution?
Yes.
Like, is themself a direct act of non-binariness, whereas themselves would be more indirect because that is like the traditional and grammatical way to do it? Just wondering your thoughts on that.
I have an hour-long talk if you want that. So this is a project that I'm working on with Byron Ahn and Lauren Ackerman, and it is in the we need to split the paper in half so that it fits in any journal stage of like a manuscript that is twice as long as the maximum exists. But so we did this massive grammaticality study, and what we found is people have different preferences looking at just singulars of like when they want themselves versus themself with different kinds of antecedents. One of the groups of people we found strongly prefers themself and finds themselves downright ungrammatical when we're talking about a specific person. That's the group that I'm in. I find when I'm talking about a specific person, if I'm like using a proper name of like Kirby likes themselves, it has to be self for me. Selves is weird. There's other people who will accept both, and then there's some people who have a slight preference for selves, and then there's a group of people who just don't like singular they. So there's lots going on. It is not the same, and there's definitely some interaction with like prescriptive ideologies about what people are taught, but also people have fairly strong like instincts about what sounds right to them that we find really interesting, and there's big syntax questions that come out of that. Yeah, thank you. That's a good question.
Thank you.
I'm gonna let you decide what order things happened in. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this talk. I was just wondering, in terms of the kind of categorization of what could qualify as a new pronoun form versus a building on an existing one, where would you draw that line if you saw a new one? Like, is there sort of this inherent nature of pronouns that would restrict that in any way, or do you see that as being possible at all?
I think it depends on the language that we're looking at, but if we're talking about English, so noun self pronouns are really fun. M. Milterson has a nice 2016 paper that is corpus work based on Tumblr people that use noun self pronouns like pup self, which is like, okay, that's cool. There is a certain amount of morphology that you gotta slap on a noun to make it work as a pronoun and to make your interlocutors understand that you're trying to use it as a pronoun. And it seems to be something like the S for a genitive and the self for a reflexive. But often you'll see like a pronoun like pup where the nominative and the accusative will be the same form. And so I'm sort of thinking of those as like a sort of wedging something into a paradigm, but like there's something going on about like how successful that works, where do people around them pick it up? Do people around them use it? And the answer seems to be mostly no, which sucks for people who are trying to use those pronouns and trying to have this like expressive and expansive gender expression. But there's something to be said for like it being pronoun shaped enough that the people around you understand it as a pronoun. And I'm not totally sure. I think it's an empirical question where exactly that line sits. It's something that I really think it would be difficult but fun to try and do a like a scale of like more pronoun-like and less pronoun-like and see how people deal with different neopronouns. That's something my lab is working on very slowly because I'm very busy, but I want other people to work on it too. Thank you.
Okay, I'm glad I got the mic first because this is directly related. Do you have any thoughts on emoji pronouns? Because I think those push the envelope in a very similar way to like noun pronouns of like pup self. People will use like the star emoji and then like star self.
I think that there's something to be said for modality here, because obviously star emoji is not going to work the same in spoken English as it is in written English. But like, I really want somebody to do like a deep digital ethnography with like, you know, I assume that these are artists on Tumblr, but like I think that there's more just like let's just describe what these little communities are up to. And what I really want especially is examples of people using them in a sentence, in a not example sentence, but just like in a natural conversation, because that's something that I don't have access to. And like, I think that the best methodology for that would be digital ethnography and then asking people to donate like chat transcripts, which is something that you could then do some deep analysis on. But like, I don't know and I want to know, and there's a modality issue going on there, and it's super interesting. Yeah, thank you.
Beautiful, thank you.
Thank you so much for the talk. I have a very sort of like related question, but not quite the same. So you gave an example of in French, is it a pronoun, the il, I-E-L?
Yes, it's a pronoun.
Yeah.
It functions, it's the nominative form, it functions the same as il and el. If your question is about clitics, I don't know.
It is not about clitics. I was just interested, so you classified that as not sort of a novel phenomenon, but an irregular form of sort of that pronoun class. And so I'm wondering how you might recommend we distinguish between what is novel phenomenon and irregular.
I think that now that I've made this taxonomy, I want us to not think about it as super rigid. And I'm like, man, I'm like already backpedaling on my brand new taxonomy, right? But I think that each of these like super categories of like, what kind of strategy is this? Of like, is this analogical extension, or is this a compound, or is this coining? Is what does this let us understand? What does this give us a framework for that we wouldn't have an analytical framework for otherwise? And things like YEL would be something where I think we could get some mileage out of the compound analysis and out of the analogical extension analysis for that. And I think that that's going to be true for a lot of these, of like, thinking about this as pattern extension will let us think about it in certain ways, and thinking about it as a compound will let us think about it in certain other ways, and both have their utility, rather than like, I don't think it's ontologically one or the other. I don't think that they're like really underlyingly one category or the other, but rather that the categories are ways of thinking about these things.
Okay, thank you.
Which is such a non-answer, but thank you for the question.
Sorry, I stole the microphone. Thank you for your talk. It's been really interesting. I just wanted to talk more about YEL. From my understanding, take everything I say with a grain of salt because I'm not a native speaker of French. But from what I understand, EL isn't really used a whole lot in like Metropole France. It's really hard to get speakers to use that in any form. I assume mostly because of Académie Française. Who knows? But I know that in 2017, a writer in Quebec published a children's book using exclusively EL to refer to the non-binary protagonist in that book, and they use the point notation for adjectives as well. I was just wondering if you have come across any other instance where it's like a non-standard dialect of another language really kind of being more of a pioneering force in adding non-binary language?
Yeah, so this is something where anecdotally, like my friend Gretchen says that there's lots of non-binary French happening in Montreal, and I'm like, Gretchen, do you want to write it down? And she's like, busy. So this is one of those things of like, man, I wish somebody else who was not me and spoke French, because I do not speak French, would go talk to a bunch of queer Canadians. That would be so nice for me personally. And
Talk
I don't
to me
know.
again in 5 years.
Yes. If you find something, I'm so serious, just email me, keep me updated once a year. Because I don't know, I want to. I think it would not be surprising to see that like peripheral varieties of big colonial languages were a little bit loosey-gooseier with regards to their relationship to centralized prescriptivist bodies like the Academy, where it's like, okay, being closer to the Academy means that I might get glared at in the cafe or something, whereas I'm far away from them. I'm in Canada. What are they going to do to me? So it would not surprise me if we found that like global Frenches that are further away from France are doing stuff differently, because it's how language works. So, you know, you're going to get some diffusion. Yeah.
Yeah, and from my understanding as well, Quebec French is really frowned upon in France. But yeah, thank you. That is something I want to look into. So like,
yeah, keep me posted. Thank you. Yeah. You gotta like yeet it.
They have those boxes that you can throw around.
Those, yeah, I remember those.
Thank you, Kirby. I had a question about, it kind of comes back to the modality thing, that online it is in many ways easier to signal what your pronouns are, right? It's like in your profile, by your photo on Zoom or whatever, if you want to put it there.
Yeah.
But in conversation in English, it's pretty awkward to indicate what your pronouns are unless you're going around doing introductions, because you don't use them to refer to yourself. And a lot of the strategies or languages that you were mentioning that where it seems to pose a lot of challenges because of all the grammatical marking, it does also seem to add an opportunity if you're doing the different M&M colors, or if you are using some neoform or some interesting way of like indicating non-binariness, that at least it's actually getting in there because you're using it in first person or using it on the verbs. So I was wondering how that signaling, that like capacity to signal relates to the different patterns.
Yeah,
that you're seeing.
I think you're absolutely right that if you have the opportunity to use something like a first person, that it makes it easier to self-introduce. But it also puts you on the spot in a way. I want to direct you towards Cedar Brown's recent paper in Gender and Language called Misgender or Out Yourself, which is about pronoun introduction practices, where a lot of people will sort of feel like this is like a vulnerable position to be like introducing yourself in this way. I also want to cite an unpublished tweet from my colleague Leah Velleman, who talked about how like pronoun introductions are sort of for the benefit of cis people, and that in mostly trans communities, a lot of what we do is like we do that for each other in a relational way. I think of it as a kind of it's something that I've been thinking about as care work and you know, this is like, hey, have I introduced you to my friend Kirby? They're a linguist, is a really easy way to like get that out of the way so that my friend is not on the spot to pronoun themselves and so that my interlocutor knows right away. And I think that in lots of like really trans and queer spaces, that's the norm, where we're sort of doing stuff on purpose to drop some hints for people so that people don't have to guess. But I think I would be really interested in an empirical look at like comparing ways that people introduce themselves in languages with first-person agreement like that, and ways that people introduce themselves in languages without first-person agreement, and also in outside of like the classroom go-around kind of setting. Yeah, thank you. It's a good question.
Thanks.
Our last question is on Zoom.
On Zoom.
Long one.
Okay.
So let's see if I can. I don't have the Q&A. I guess I'll just read it. This is from Cherry. Thanks for this talk. As some background, I work on Ojibwe, which has grammatical gender based on animacy. Illustrating this fact with students who are English only or biological sex-based
Is your
grammar,
mic on?
gender, language only. I find a lot of this data you shared about pronoun formation fascinating. However, I think English has a pretty easy slam dunk here to use singular they, but people should absolutely use the pronoun or pronoun they most prefer. I'm more concerned about languages that have masked femme genders and have to deal with agreement. The pragmatic strategy that you shared about switching back and forth most directly addresses this. In Ojibwe, we also have heterogeneous gender categories, so perhaps speakers could form a subgender or an alternate agreement pattern that functions with one of the established categories and deal with the agreement that way. Any thoughts on this?
Thank you. That's such a great question, and thank you, Cherry, for the long wait. I'm sorry that we weren't able to get to you right away. So the first thing I would say is I absolutely would not, I do not think that I should be the person to say, oh, you should try this. Because as a non-member of the community and somebody who's just like not familiar with the community, I don't know what non-binary members of the community want and need. And I think that this is one of those things where it really has to come from the people who have the most, where is my camera? Where am I looking? I want to like feign eye contact there. I think that the people whose opinions matter most about this are non-binary Ojibwe speakers. And what I would want to do with that is say like, okay, let's get a bunch of you together and talk about what you wish was happening and what, if you could wave a magic wand and make everybody do a certain thing, what would you ask them to do? And develop something where it's like part of like who is being affected by this. And so there's that. And then there's the other thing of like, well, what are people doing already? Because I bet there are people doing stuff. And it's just a matter of like asking people, what are you already up to? That like is coming back to the like, people have strategies for navigating this frequently. And one of the things that I think we need to admit is like, when we're talking about a minoritized language, maybe we don't want the strategy to be, I just speak English. And so I think that that has to be part of the conversation is like, I want a way to talk about this in Ojibwe so that I am not just leaning back on English because I don't like that sort of relationship and hierarchy that it sets up. And so I think that that again needs to be something where people are just trying stuff and doing stuff. And I think like, making a new gender category using sort of some spare parts that we have around of these noun classes that are like outside of the binary sounds cool. I think switching back and forth sounds cool. I think it sounds like maybe avoidance is gonna be too hard and not work. I'm not really sure. But I think that it's something where I'm not the right person to say the right answer about this because, again, there's not gonna be one right answer, and also, like, I think it needs to not be coming from, like, me, a white guy outside the community who doesn't know anything. So yeah, thank you for that question. I really appreciate it.
Turning on so that people can hear us on Zoom. If we can have one more round of applause for our wonderful colloquium speaker. This is part of our linguistics department colloquium series. Our next colloquia is on what date? Our next colloquium will be in November, and stay tuned for more information. If you are interested in these questions of trans and non-binary linguistics more broadly, New Ways of Analyzing Variation, the largest sociolinguistics conference, will be held here on November 5th through the 7th. Our closing plenary will be given by another absolutely fantastic expert in translinguistics, Lal Zemin of the University of California, Santa Barbara. We will be ending N-Wave with a plenary titled The Future of Sociolinguistics is Trans, which we have seen today. So thank you all for your attendance. There are snackies in the back for those of you in person. For those of you on Zoom, please go grab your own.